or the generations of, starting with the heavens and the earth, the creation, Adam, Noah, Shem, and then through Shem we get to Terah, Abraham's father. Ishmael has a side genealogy. Then we get to the patriarchs as we move through all the way up to Jacob. And then we talk about the Joseph narrative. We're keeping track of the godly line, the seed. Somewhere through this line will emerge the he of Genesis 3:15, who will come and oppose the opposing agenda from the devil. The devil will be bruised, and in the process there'll be this cosmic struggle that's going on down the road. So this is what we have. So God's going to continue to work through the patriarchs, and even with Abraham's pinnacle of faith, some of the other patriarchs probably are not as impressive with regards to the walk of faith. They're a little more passive. Isaac, in terms of the narrative and the storyline, really plays somewhat of a minor role in patriarchal history. The biggest challenge for Isaac was finding him a wife, and we see turn back to Genesis 24. This is just one of those funny bits, I think. I hope it works. Maybe not. Uh-oh. Is my technology not going to work? Okay. All right. We'll pass on that. So, all right. So we're going to get to Genesis 24, and Isaac is going to have a wife, Rebekah, and she's chosen, and we have some attention given to her sons, Jacob and Esau. And let's pick up the story in Genesis chapter 25, beginning in verse 21. And with regards to Isaac's sons, Isaac prayed to the Lord in chapter 25, verse 21, on behalf of his wife because she was barren. So there's still this struggle over seed. The Lord answered him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. But the children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it is so, then why am I this way?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said, "Two nations are in your womb, and two people shall be separated from your body. And one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." So this is the beginning of this, at the start, the struggle between Jacob and Esau. And in verse 30, we have the beginning of the sibling rivalry in chapter 25, verse 30. And Esau says to Jacob, "Please let me have a swallow of that red stuff there." Wait a minute. I'm not ready for that. 20... well, I guess that's the beginning. Okay. So, that's right. So we've got this conflict. I really wanted to start in verse 31. Jacob says, "First sell me your birthright," which was supposed to go to the firstborn son. Esau said, "Behold, I'm about to die, so what use then is the birthright to me?" Jacob said, "First swear to me." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went on his way, and Esau despised his birthright. So we've got the beginnings of this sibling rivalry going on here. After a brief quarrel over the wells, we have this sibling rivalry continuing on. In verse 18, in chapter 27, then he came to his father and said, "My father." And he said, "Here am I. Who are you, my son?" And Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Get up, please sit and eat of my game, that you may bless me." So Jacob and his mother are somewhat conspiring here. There's going to be this theme of deception that's introduced. Not only is the birthright going to be stolen through deception, now we're going to have the blessing that's intended for the firstborn son. And Jacob and mother are going after this as well. So we see that beginning here in this development. But what's interesting, here we have the blessing from Father Isaac going to Jacob here in verse 27. And he says, "See, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. Now may God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and the abundance of grain, new wine. May people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be masters of your brothers, and may your mother's sons come bow down. Cursed be those who curse you, and blessed be those who bless you." So this is the blessing that's stolen here. Let's see. So let's move on to... So here's I'm just going to sit down for a second. The theme of deception, and I've got deception in my own family, in my own household, and it comes from this little guy, this little gal, Inlai, a little Welsh corgi. So this is deception in my own family, and you know the cute little, deceiving looks that your pets can give. This is her "I need you to do something for me" look. And other people in my household are also really good with this same kind of look. And there she is. So this is an influential, deceptive look here. And this is basically this deception is going on, and sibling rivalry and all of this starts to creep in with regards to the household of Isaac, and we'll carry on into the household of Jacob. So we see, I'll just recount this. I guess I had some overlap there in my slides. So in Genesis 27, in that whole account, we saw that Rebekah leads her son Jacob and dresses up like Esau to deceive the now old and hard of seeing Isaac. So in verse 12 in chapter 27, let's see here. Here's where I wanted to go. And we see that the theme of deception there in verse 12 in the question, "Perhaps my father will feel me, and then I shall be as a deceiver in his sight, and I shall bring upon myself a curse and not a blessing." So there's a little bit of struggle there at first, but this deception strategy continues on. And over here, after the blessing is stolen, we see Esau responding. After the fact and after he discovers what's just happened, Esau is going to hear the words in verse 34 of his father, and he cries out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry, and said to his father, "Bless me, even me also, my father." And he said, "Your brother came deceitfully and has taken away your blessing." Then he said, "Is he not rightly named Jacob?" Whose name kind of means heel grabber, kind of like or one who supplants. Jake, for he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing. And he said, "Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" But Isaac answered and said, "Esau, behold, I have made him your master, and all his relatives I have given to him as servants, and grain and new wine, and I have sustained him. Now as for you then, what can I do, my son?" So this is the beginning of this intense rivalry between 2 brothers. This is interesting. Esau will be the precursor to the Edomites, the nation of Edom, later on. And it's interesting that this sibling rivalry, although we'll see here just around the corner, it's going to be semi-resolved, never fully gets resolved in history. There's always going to be strife between Edom and the nation of Israel, especially Judah in the south. And so there's some prophetic activity that happens later against the Edomites when Judah loses her capital city in Jerusalem. So what happens after this? Let's see. Let's turn to chapter 28. Because of this conflict and now the potential loss of Jacob at the hand of Esau, Jacob's sent away. And you probably know the story here in chapter 28. Let's look at verses 1 through 5. Isaac calls Jacob and blesses him, charged him, and said, "You shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan. So go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and from there take yourself a wife from the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. And may God, El Shaddai, bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may become a company of peoples. May he also give you the blessing of Abraham to you and to your seed with you, that you may possess the land of your sojournings, which God gave to Abraham. So that's an important focal point there. You see the continuity. Now this blessing, this baton is going to be passed on to Jacob as he moves ahead. But the struggle over seed is not over yet. We turn to chapter 28 and in verses 10 through 14. Jacob is going to hear from the Lord, and through a dream, Jacob departed Beersheba and went to Haran. He came to a certain place and spent the night there because the sun had set, and he took one of the stones of the place and he put it under his head and lay down in that place. Now that's kind of odd, but archaeologically actually you see these, then they found these curved stones just laying around. I call them the Hotel Sixes of the day. And it was a place where you go and set up camp. And these stones are actually curved so that just at the curvature of your neck, they offer that support, like a permanent pillow of the day. That's where you'd go and set up camp. And they were there as a means of helping the travelers. So that's what was going on there with the stone. And he had a dream, and behold, a ladder was set on earth with the top reaching to heaven, and behold, angels were ascending and descending on it. Verse 13, and behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am Yahweh, the God of your father Abraham, the God of Isaac. The land which ye lie, I will give it to you and to your descendants, to your seed. Your seed shall be also like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread out to the west, to the east, to the north, and to the south. We've heard this before. And in you and in your seed, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And even more so, I'll be with you. I'll keep you wherever you go. Will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I've done what I've promised. So there's that divine affirmation, what God's going to do, He's promised to do, He's obligated to do. He's responding to the great faith that was demonstrated by Abraham, that we focused on just a while ago. And so this is encouraging to Jacob. And this is going to be important. And there's going to be the beginnings here of a transformation in Jacob. All right, he's a deceiver. He's been involved in deception. And now in chapter 29, we begin to see the turning point for the patriarch Jacob. Well, let's take a look at chapter 29. And this is important because this is the chapter where he meets up with his, one of a few wives. He's going to meet Rachel. And going to the household of Jacob, he meets up with Rachel, and he confirms that she's truly the daughter of Laban. So he's at the right place. And I think I want to start down there in the exchange between Laban and Jacob. There's the recognition that Jacob is going to have to work off and pay for the bride price. And Laban says in verse 14, surely you are my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him a month. And Laban said to Jacob, because you're my relative, you should therefore serve me for nothing. Tell me, what shall your wages be? And Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful of form and face. Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, I'll serve you even 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. And Laban said, it's better that I give her to you than I should give her to another man, so stay with me. Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days. Sounds like a Hallmark card, doesn't it? Because of his love for her. All right, so remember, up until now we have Jacob the deceiver. Of course, he was aided by his mom, and all of this has happened up until now. So it's interesting, sometimes when you read these historical accounts, you see the irony just leaping off the page, and at times, humor, actually, in the Bible. All right, so let's take a look at this next account. Jacob finally says, after the 7 years was over, right? Give me my wife, for my time is completed, that I may go into her. Make her my wife. And Laban gathered all the men of the place, and he enacted a feast. That came about in the evening that he took his daughter Leah and brought her to him, Leah, and Jacob went into her. There's some mystery there. How did this happen? Maybe he was a little tipsy or whatever. Laban also gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. So it came about in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. Now what's interesting, and a lot of you might not know, be careful there. A lot of you might not know this, but as Jacob is waking up in the morning, he hears a sound, and it's a sound effect that probably would have been in the soundtrack of this narrative. Right? Leah's name means cow in Hebrew. Yeah. So there's a little bit of humor and a little bit of irony there. Her name means cow. And, she's weak of eyes over here. She's not a good looker. Verse 17. Of course, there's this contrast between Rachel, whose name means beautiful and fair, and Leah, whose name means cow. And she's the one he wakes up with in the morning. So there's this ironic twist that happens here. And it's right here in the text. Of course, then the text goes on. You see in verse 25. So it came about in the morning that, behold, it was the cow. And he said to Laban, what is this that you've done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why have you deceived me? There's the theological question. You see it? So the deceiver now has been deceived. Yeah. So there's the question. The deceiver has been deceived. And Laban said, it's not the practice in our place to marry off the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, and we'll give you the other for the service which you also served me for another 7 years. And Jacob did so and completed her week and gave him his daughter Rachel as wife. So the rest of it, now he's got 2 for the price of 1, or 2 for the price of 2, or whatever. So this is the beginning point, and there's irony here. And so we move over to chapter 32, and Jacob's going to prosper. God's not through with him yet. And chapter let's see. Right. 32. That's where I wanted to go. So chapter 32. What we're going to have here, now Jacob is traveling with his household. There's now going to be another encounter with Esau. Esau's kind of been written off the pages for a while. Now Esau comes back, and there's this encounter here in chapter 32. And let's look at beginning in verse 20. Well, let's first look at what happens first precipitates the encounter between Jacob and Esau. And it's interesting, God intervenes himself. And I call this the divine wrestling match. In chapter 32, verse 24, Jacob was left alone. And here's one of these unnamed men coming out of the blue, wrestles with him until daybreak. And when he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh. So the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated when he wrestled with him. And he said, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So he said, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel. Now, name changes have been significant as we've seen. Abram to Abraham, now Jacob to Israel. The name change oftentimes accompanies a change of heart or a significant covenant moment. So you might say Jacob is finally catching up with the fact and the reality of who he is and the significance of the what next and what he's supposed to do to be faithful and respond to his end of the deal with regards to covenant relationship. But you've not striven with, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. Jacob asked him and said, please tell me your name. But he said, what is it that you ask my name? And he blessed him there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, I've seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved. So this divine wrestling match, you might call it maybe a little bit of a gentle divine nudge, a wake-up call. It's going to prepare Jacob for the significant what next, and that's the encounter with Esau. And in chapter 33, we see this potentially event that could have put the whole thing in jeopardy. And here we have Jacob's household potentially threatened here with the encounter with Esau's household. Yeah, question?
I feel like I should know this, that off the top of my head. What does Israel mean? So, like, Jacob's name originally meant deceiver, and then it got changed to Israel, but I don't remember, like, what the name Israel means.
Oh,
it doesn't say in the text.
One who strives.
Oh, okay.
That idea. One who strives with God. El is the name of God.
Okay.
So something like that. All right. Now, chapter 33. So here's this significant raising of eyes. We've seen that language before, the language of sight. And behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him in chapter 33. So what did Jacob do? Turned and ran. Hightailed it the other direction. No. He divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two handmaids. And he put the maids and children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. And he himself passed ahead of them and bowed down to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. Which, bowing down is a posture of worship as well as humility. That kind of a thing. So he's kind of setting the tone even before Esau. But then what does Esau do? What's interesting, I think, that with these brothers, Esau and Jacob, we've seen the details with regards to Jacob and the beginnings of his transformation. Now, something has been going on with Esau as well, maybe parallel. God's bringing these two brothers together. Esau runs, and in a very moving scene, runs to meet him, embraces him, and he fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. There's the reconciliation. And that was a significant event. It needed to happen. And he lifted his eyes and saw the women and children. Saw. That's the affirmation and confirmation of, here's the blessing that God has given you in terms of the beginnings of the fulfillment of the seed, that your seed would be multiplied. Who are these with you, he asked. So he said, the children whom God has graciously given your servant. There's the affirmation. And then the maids came near with their children and bowed down. And Leah likewise came near with her children, and they bowed down. And afterward Joseph came near with Rachel, and they bowed down. And he said, what do you mean, by all this company which I have met? And he said, to find favor in the sight of my Lord. But Esau said, I have plenty, my brother. Let what you have be your own. So there's this great reconciliation between two brothers. And that's what we have here. So we see the baton continuing to be passed on. What's interesting is what happens next in chapter 34. And this is a kind of a pivotal chapter, oftentimes overlooked, because we typically just jump right into the Joseph narrative, which begins over here in chapter 39. Or actually 37. But this is an interesting chapter, as it informs how we're to understand the brothers. Because Jacob has built his household on his two wives, Rachel and Leah, and the two handmaids. And we have the beginnings here and the assignment of the 12 sons. 12 sons in this household. Joseph and Benjamin are the two youngest sons, and they're born to Rachel. The others come from the other two handmaids and Leah. So you've got the older group of 10 brothers and the two younger sons, Joseph and Benjamin, who are born to Rachel. And here's a significant event in chapter 34. And it helps us understand that while Jacob had his, you might say, his transformation, like Abraham, his great faith moment and trusting in the Lord and the affirmation that happens there, in terms of the covenant baton that we keep seeing being passed on. What's going to happen with the sons, these brothers, this group of 10? Where are they at in their faith journey, you might say? And Genesis 34 helps us to understand that. Where's this sibling rivalry that got started between Jacob and Esau? Is it being passed on to the brothers? Is there going to be sibling rivalry again? What about the theme of deception? Is deception going to be a common pattern now that we're going to see over and over again amongst the brothers? So let's take a look at chapter 34 and look at it a little bit here, if you're not familiar with this passage. And let me have somebody else read for a little bit. Would anybody like to take this on? Chapter 34. I'll help you with the hard to pronounce names. Okay, go ahead. Starting in verse 1. Until I tell you to stop.
Okay.
I may interrupt you along the way. So.
Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the daughters of the land. When Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he took her and lay with her by force. He was deeply attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the girl and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Give me this young girl for a wife." Now Jacob heard that he defiled Dinah, his daughter, but his sons were with his livestock in the field, so Jacob kept silent until they came in. Then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. Now the sons of Jacob came in from the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved. And they were very angry because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing ought not to be done. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, "The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him in marriage. Intermarry with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. Thus you shall live with us, and the land shall be open before you. Live and trade in it, and acquire property in it." Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, "If I find favor in your sight, then I will give whatever you say to me. Ask me ever so much bridal payment and gift, and I will give you according as you say to me, but give me the girl in the marriage."
All right, let's just pause there. Now this idea of, there's a few things. You read something like this, and oftentimes you have to ask yourself, what's wrong with this picture? You know, are there red lights going off? And yes, they are. You see in verse 9, there's this discussion of intermarry with us, give us your daughters, and take our daughters for yourselves. So oftentimes in the ancient world, there'd be an exchange of women when a covenant was made between two kings, or in this case, two heads of households. And that's how you kind of sealed the deal. And who should Israel who should Jacob be entering into covenant relationship with? You know, that's the question. Is this something he should be doing? And it's no. The answer is no. He's in a covenant relationship with one king, and that's all that's necessary. So this is not going to lead the right direction. And then in verse 13, we pick up with the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and said to Hamor, with deceit. There's this theme of deception coming back. You see that? And spoke to them because he had defiled Dinah, their sister. And they said to him, "We cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will consent with you. If you become like us, and that every male of you be circumcised, then, we will give our daughters to you. We'll take your daughters for ourselves. We'll live with you and become one people." This is a threat to the seed. This is a threat to the godly line, and it's wrong at every angle. So what happens? Their words in verse 18, well, we'll do what you say. It seems reasonable to us. So the young men did not delay to do this thing because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. He was more respected than all the household of his father. So they spoke to the men of the city, and we've got to do this thing in order for this thing to move ahead. Verses 21 and 22. So the idea of circumcision is introduced to the entire male community. And so they all went out of the gate, verse 24, of the city and listened to Hamor and to his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of his city. Verse 25, it came about on the third day while they were still in pain, that two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took their sword and came upon the city unawares and killed every male. All right. And they killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the edge of the sword and took Dinah from Shechem's house and went forth. All right, so there you go. Now you've got these brothers who are deceitful and are bent to even kill if it's to advantage them, if it's going to give them the advantage. And what we want to do with chapter 34 is take that with the brothers as we move into the Joseph narrative. Brothers who are deceitful and are willing to kill in order for personal gain, to get the advantage in some way. So this is what we have as we move into the Joseph narrative. So after this, we're going to see a focus on the development of the line. We're going to have let's see. That's right. We covered all of this. That's the Shechem chapter 34 chapter. So after that, after 34, we've got some focus now that Jacob is going to be named Israel, and that's a reaffirmation of his name in chapter 35. So the covenant baton is clearly in line in terms of the godly line from, if we remind ourselves, Adam and Eve, Seth, down to Noah, and then to his son Shem. And then from Shem we move over to the line down to Terah, Abraham's father. And then we jump over to Abraham. We have Ishmael, Isaac. We covered that. Jacob and Esau, the sibling rivalry. Leah, Rachel, and the two handmaids. And then from there we have the 12 sons and the two by Rachel, Joseph, and Benjamin, who are the youngest, and the other 10. And so this is the dynamic that we have as we enter into the Joseph narrative. And the 10 have shown their true colors. Deception and bent to even murder if it allows them to get the advantage. So we move into the Joseph narrative. And here he is, prominently displayed. The famous Donny Osmond version on Hollywood Broadway production. So if we turn to chapter 37, and so far, let's just read the first little bit there. And Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned in the land of Canaan. So these are the records, or the Toledot formula there for Jacob. Joseph, when 17 years of age, was pasturing the flock with his brothers while he was still a youth, along with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. That's what we'd expect. A bad report. We don't know the details. But these are sons who are questionable at best. They're deceivers and prone to murder and any other bad report that could come. So what we have here is the beginning of the sibling rivalry motif that comes back again. And of course, there's interesting fatherly focus on Joseph in verse 3. Israel loved Joseph more than all of his sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a multicolored tunic which will be a valuable outer garment to wear. Now, I don't know about, I'm merely speculating. I'm just wondering if Jacob, as a father, in terms of trying to favor Joseph or loving him, or the language here is loving him more than all of his other sons. I'm speculating, but I'm wondering if Jacob has a sense that the promise for the future of this household is not with the 10, because they're not where they need to be right now. I'm not really, maybe not in the text so much, but I've got more hope for this guy. This is one of my youngest sons. I'm hopeful that he'll take the seed of faith that I have in my own heart and takes that to help this household move forward, Joseph. So I'm wondering if that might be going on, if already, and we know that Jacob, as a father, was fully aware of the whole Shechemite episode. So there's still, he's still reeling from that, maybe, perhaps, in terms of favoring one of the younger sons. Joseph and Benjamin weren't implicated in the whole Shechemite encounter. They were young and with mom. They were too young to be involved in that. So there may be a little bit of that going on here as we move into the Joseph narrative. But it's certainly, these brothers, that's like stirring up a hornet's nest, right? And we see in verse 4, the brothers saw that their father loved Joseph more than all of his brothers. And so how do they respond? They hate. And they couldn't speak to him on friendly terms. So we have the whole episode there in chapter 37, and Joseph's going to have dreams, and that certainly is not helping the situation with regards to how the brothers are responding. And eventually what happens is we have their hatred is expressed in verses 3 and 4. We have verse 8. His brothers said to him, "Are you actually going to reign over us? Are you really going to rule over us?" in the Hebrew. So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. So this is just escalating. This is just aggravating this whole episode. And then again in verse 11. And finally his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in his mind. And this is with regards to Joseph acknowledging that your mother, I and your mother and your brothers actually will come to bow down before you on the ground. Will this bowing actually happen? So again, Jacob is hearing these things. He's watching Joseph in action and the interaction with the brothers. And all of this is going on. What's interesting, though, in verse 13, and Israel said to Joseph, "Where are your brothers? Are your brothers not pasturing the flock in Shechem? Why are they back in Shechem? Come and I will send you to them." And he said to them, "I will go." Joseph's going to be sent to seek the shalom, the welfare of the brothers, and the shalom of the flock, and then bring back word to his father. All right, so he's going to be on a journey of peace, shalom, and interacting with his brothers. And then what happens next in verse 18? They see him from a distance, and they plot to put him to death. So they're bent, just, have they changed from Genesis 34? No. They've got an opportunity here. Joseph's isolated from the protection of his mom and his dad, and they've got an opportunity. So we see this plot to kill Joseph. Here comes the dreamer in verse 19. And come, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. And we'll deceive our father and say a beast devoured him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. We won't be bowing to him then. Reuben, the firstborn, said this and rescued Joseph out of their hands. And so, let's not take his life, guys. I think that might be too intense. Reuben further said, well, shed no blood. Throw him into this pit in the middle of the wilderness. Don't lay hands on him, so that he might be so that he might rescue him out of his hands to restore him to his father. He was hoping to go back and rescue Joseph himself. So it came about when Joseph reached his brothers, they stripped him of his tunic, that multicolored outer garment. They took him, threw him in the pit. The pit was empty without any water in it. They sat down to eat a meal. They raised their eyes and saw this group of traders coming through in verse 25. What profit is for us to kill our brother and to cover up his blood? Let's make a profit and sell him, make a little money on the side, and write him off as a brother. See? So this is almost as good as, I would almost argue that this is just as good as fratricide. When you write off a brother like that, you're demonstrating disloyalty to the household. So these brothers, 10, are pretty much in a unanimity in terms of how they're treating a brother. Disloyalty. He's not our brother anymore. He ceases to exist. We're selling him and forgetting about him. He's never coming back. See? So this isn't a kinder, gentler motion here from the brothers. They're committing fratricide, I would argue. And then they go back, and as you can see there at the end, they deceive their father and convince Dad that he's been killed by a wild animal, and they convince him that he's dead. So for their eyes, in the brothers' eyes, he's as good as dead. He's never coming back, and we've convinced the whole household now that Joseph's dead. So that's a great start to a patriarchal narrative here, and we're almost to the end of the book of Genesis, and we're wondering where this thing's going to go. We've got turmoil and chaos in the household of Jacob, and where's the promise of seed going to end up? How about the promise of land and some of these things that were promised to Abraham? We're not there yet, So let's see. Interestingly, right in the middle of all this, and we'll finish chapter 38 and take our break. We have chapter 38. Yeah, go ahead.
Before you get to chapter 38, so when you say so you don't see Judah offering up, hey, let's sell him. You see that more as like just kind of the highlight, kind of like the depravity of his heart, or so it's not like him like kind of saving him from his brothers, selling him to slavery, at least preserving his life. It's more like just as you see it more like.
You mean Reuben?
Well, no. When Judah says,
"Oh,
what profit is it for us to kill our brothers and cover up his blood?" and kind of says, "Let's sell him," you don't see that as him saving him. You see that as something like his.
Yeah, I'm a little hard on the brothers. Yeah, I mean, I suppose there would be a commentator out there that might say that that's maybe a ray of hope.
A big character, a little later on. I didn't know if
he
highlight
is
his sinfulness or highlight something.
I think though, when you sell a brother like that, you're writing him off. So
slavery.
Yeah, and maybe death. So it's disloyalty. I think that's the main idea. It's infidelity. It's disloyalty. It's what brothers shouldn't do as they interact and treat each other. And if you think of who the intended audience is, right? Israel, they're the group of 12 here. They see themselves as now tribes who've come out of Egypt and are poised and ready to enter the promised land. So really, I think this is, if you think of Moses, the theologian and educator, he's highlighting things that would have a real bite for these tribes. As they are looking around at themselves, they're seeing, are we to act like this? Are we supposed to treat each other this way? What happens if we treat each other this way? We're going to fail when we go there, So as this all gets worked out, as we'll see, I think it really leaves a pretty profound, illustration of what God's going to do to bring about His agenda despite the chaos that's created by this group of 10, these brothers. We'll get to the very end of the book of Genesis, and you may not agree with me where we end up with these brothers. I still think we're somewhat ambiguous in terms of where they are, whether or not their conflict with Joseph gets resolved or not. They're going to put words into the mouth of their dead, deceased father. And that's when we have I call it the thesis statement of the book. You intended it for evil. God intended it for good, right? To bring about this present result, to preserve this group and bring everybody into Egypt to bring about the next thing. So we'll get there eventually. But in chapter 38, let's take a look at that really quick. It's an interesting little account. I call it the greatest love story never told that changed history forever. Chapter 38, it just falls right out of the sky, right in the middle of the Joseph narrative, you know? And it's like, what are we doing? And it's okay for the authors of the Old Testament to do this occasionally. It's the author is now taking us on a rabbit trail, and he's showing us, or what we would call telescoping in on a particular one of the 10 brothers, and giving us a little more information about this brother Judah. So here we go, chapter 38. I'll kind of cover this and give you the kind of the idea as we go along. And again, this kind of gives us a little glimpse into the divine activity, what God is doing behind the scenes to bring about this present result, right, at the end of Genesis. But we've got conflict over the seed going on here in this chapter. And so let's just look at it. It came about that at that time Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. You know that Judah is going to end up being the one of the 12 brothers who's carrying the baton of the seed, right? Lion of Judah, your scepter shall not depart. This is going to be, through Judah, not through the firstborn, but through Judah will be the seed that eventually gets us to King David and then to the Messiah down the road. So this is an interesting little focus in that Moses gives us. Judah saw there was a daughter of a certain Canaanite. So, again, the red light goes off. So what's he doing taking a daughter from amongst the Canaanites whose name was Shua, and he took her and went into her. She conceived and bore a son whose name was She conceived again, bore a son whose name was Onan. She bore still another son whose name was Shelah. And it was at Cheziv that she bore him. Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. So now we have a conflict. This is interesting. And we can look up in places like, let's see, what was that reference again? All right. Okay. Maybe I got attacked by my cat in the middle of this. There is a practice in terms of the household structure, Levirate Marriage. All right? Maybe you've heard of that in terms of the provisions that were made for the head of the household, and the firstborn son in this case, should he lose his wife and not be able to bear sons, the second in command would then move in and provide the seed for the particular, in this case, widow, to provide her a son so that the name of that household could be carried on and preserved. So this is a Levirate marriage provision. And what we're going to see here is this law, which would have been probably, I think, would have been in practice and understood. But you see it in the details of the text. So let's take a look. But in verse 7, Judah's firstborn son was evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord took his life, and Judah said to Onan, and here's the reference to it. So go into your brother's wife and perform your duty as a brother-in-law to her, and raise up an offspring or a seed for your brother. And Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So it came about that when he went into his brother's wife, he wasted his seed on the ground in order not to give offspring to his brother. So he refused to perform the Levirate marriage law or provision. But what he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, so he took his life also. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up." For he thought, "I am afraid that he too may die like his brothers." So Tamar went and lived in her father's house. Now, she's being, there's you might say a violation of what would have been normal practice in law here, and not providing for her here as a widow. And Judah, what we would have seen would be the provision made here for Tamar. And what's interesting is how this particular chapter is linked to the last book that we're going to cover this semester in this class, and that's the book of Ruth. Because, you know, the whole story of Ruth and Boaz, right, comes back to this idea when Ruth ends up a widow and without a husband, that Boaz steps in, right, to perform the Levirate marriage provision but he takes her as a wife and settles it legally. So there's a connection here where Tamar and Ruth are somewhat connected through that provision. Tamar is somewhat violated in respects to that, while the contrast is in the account of Ruth. So we'll talk more about that in just a second. And what happens here is that Tamar is being ignored. You see that. And after a considerable time, verse 12, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, died. And when the time of mourning was ended, what did Judah do? He goes up to the sheep shearers at Timnah, hang out with some old buddies, he and his friend, Hira the Adulamite. And so it was told to Tamar, behold, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. She's a desperate woman, Tamar. She's being ignored and not provided for, according to the laws of the land, you might say. And you'd expect this kind of proper behavior to come from one from the line of Judah, from the household of Jacob. But this is like the deception that we saw in chapter 34. Judah is acting in line with, hey, I can ignore this. I don't have to do this. He's acting willy-nilly here. She's a desperate woman, and she's going to do something now that out of desperation, but she's going to take the bull by the horns. And so she removed her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself and sat at the gateway of Enaim, just up the road from where Judah was going, which is on the road to Timnah. And she saw that Shelah had grown up, but she had not been given to him as a wife. So Judah's choosing not to follow through here. Judah saw her. He thought she was a harlot, for she had covered her face. So the irony there is that she continues to be ignored and not seen. And he doesn't see Tamar, he sees a harlot. So he turned aside to her by the road and said, here now, let me come in to you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, what will you give me that you may come in to me? And he said, therefore I'll send you a kid from the flock, that'll be your payment. She said, well, that's coming later, but will you give me a pledge until you send it? And he said, what pledge shall I give you? She said, your seal and your cord, and your staff that is in your hand. So he gave them to her, and he went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and departed, and removed her veil, and put on her widow's garments. When Judah set the kid by his friend the Adulamite to receive the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her. And he asked the men of her place, saying, where is the temple prostitute who was by the road at Enaim? And they said, there's been no temple prostitute here. That's interesting, isn't it? Maybe they knew who she was. They recognized her, but he didn't. So he returned to Judah and said, I didn't find her. And furthermore, the men of the place said, there's been no temple prostitute here. Then Judah said, let her keep them, lest we become a laughingstock. After all, I sent this kid, but you did not find her. So time passes. Then it was about 3 months later that Judah was informed, your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the harlot, and behold, she's with child by harlotry. And Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. Which is, again, something's wrong there. That's a violation. That's not the normal course and procedure that would be taking place if there was this kind of violation within the household. Nobody was burned. It was while she was being brought out that she sent to her father-in-law, saying, I'm with child by the man who these things belong to. And she said, please examine and see whose signet ring and cords and staff are these. Judah recognized them and said, she's more righteous than I, inasmuch as I did not give her to my son Shelah. And he said, and he did not have relations with her again. So at that time she was giving birth, and behold, there were twins in her womb. And what are their names? But she came about as she drew back his hand, and that behold, his brother came out. Then she said, what a breach you have made for yourself. So his name was Perez. The other brother's name was Zerah. And if we turn over to the end of the book of Ruth, we see the dramatic connection there. And at the very end of the book of Ruth, this is where we'll there we go. It's going too far there. We see who this Perez is in the Davidic line. These are the generations of Perez. So there's Perez, born to Jacob and Tamar. Perez was born Hezron. Hezron was born Ram, and to Ram Amminadab. And to Amminadab was born Nashon. Nashon Salmon. And Salmon was born Boaz. Boaz Obed. And Obed Jesse. And to Jesse David. So there's the connection in the genealogy. And what's interesting, we have there's the veiled, kind of a Renaissance look there. I found that painting. But here we have the interesting thing, and we'll take our break here. We've got some interesting intersections here with women who are outside of the Israelite godly line seed, but called or allowed to come in, and coming in at some very interesting moments. So here's Judah and Tamar. She's coming from the Canaanites. She has Perez. Perez has Salmon. Salmon's with Rahab. We're going to see Rahab enter into the picture in the book of Joshua. And then later we're going to see Ruth and Boaz. She comes in from the Moabites. And then eventually we'll get down to King David here. So it's interesting how God is an interesting genealogy with respects to non-Israelite women who have a significant role to play in terms of contributing to the seed leading to King David. And some of these women speak pretty profoundly with regards to recognizing the God of Israel. Ruth and Rahab, for example. We don't know much about Tamar, but anyway, so that's we'll talk more about that as we go. So, all right, well, let's take a 5-minute break, and we'll come back and finish in the home stretch here.